Baby. Today's topic is coping with death and mourning. And it's interesting because we put this in the series. It's the last in the series of building relationships. So it's an interesting place to put it. Building relationships, and we're talking about coping with death and mourning. And the answer is, why are we doing this? And the answer is because through death and mourning, hopefully, a person will build new relationships. It's the end of one era and the beginning of a new era. We started off the series with building a relationship with God, with Hashem. And one of the ways of doing that is when a person copes with tragedy, it has two effects. Either it can strengthen the person's belief in God and make them stronger and more devoted and make the ties stronger, or a person can rebel and a person can break their bonds with God. So death is two different motivations, causes two different things, two different reactions. We find in Jewish law, death is associated with defilement, with tumah, with defilement. Therefore, a Kohen is not allowed to go to the cemetery. A Kohen is not allowed to touch a dead body. A doctor cannot be a Kohen cannot be a doctor, because of the associations with death. A Kohen is not allowed to associate with death except for 7 relatives for which there's an obligation to mourn. Father, mother, sister, brother, son, daughter, and spouse. 7 relatives a person has to mourn, and those are the 7 relatives for which a Kohen may defile himself. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, one of the great German rabbis, wrote many books, and he writes about the symbolism of Judaism. What is the symbolism, what is the deeper meaning behind this idea of defilement, ritual defilement? A person touches a dead body, gets defiled. What does that mean? Why would a priest become defiled by touching a dead body? What is the effect of a dead body? Till today, scientifically there's no real effect. You touch a dead body, nothing happened. Maybe there's more germs, maybe there's bacteria, whatever it is, but what's the idea? There's spiritual defilement over here. So he explains that he has a brilliant idea. What is spiritual defilement? He says, when a person is confronted with death, the natural reaction is to be more involved with the pleasures of this world. If this is the end, while we're here, let's enjoy ourselves. Let's enjoy ourselves while we're here. We find that was the reaction of the Romans and the Greeks. In fact, some of the orgies, they would put a skull in front of them and say, look, let's enjoy ourselves before we go. That's the end of man. So if this is the end, let's enjoy ourselves. So he says that is the defilement associated with death. The defilement associated with death is that a person might fool themselves and say, look, if that's the end, we're here temporarily, let's enjoy ourselves as much as possible. So that is one of the which is really a rebellion against God. So that's one of the reactions a person has to death and dying is, let's enjoy ourselves while we're here. The other reaction a person has is maybe solidifying the other relationships. We lost one relationship broke, one relationship is finished, let's try and revitalize another relationship. There's a beautiful story. Chavetz Chaim says this story. He says once he went to a funeral, and there was a funeral of a widow, lost her husband, lost her children, lost everything. It was the last child she was burying. She lost everyone. And he hears her say at the funeral, she says, God, you have taken all my relatives away from me. Right? All the love which I showed for them, I now will show you. Whereas before I shared my heart with my relatives and you, now there's no relatives to share with. I'm going to share my love with you. So it's a way of bonding with God. So a person in grief can bond with God, or a person in grief can rebel with God, against God, and choose the material path. The truth is, we know that rebellion against God doesn't help. We see this in the story of Jonah, which is why we read it in Yom Kippur. A person can rebel, but you know what? Look at Jonah. He rebelled. He tried to run away. What happened? He gets swallowed by a fish, and eventually he comes back. The rabbis say that's already a parable of reincarnation. Runs away, dies. Says goes into the big fish, which is like Gehinnom, gets spit out again. He gets reborn again. So there's no escape from God. No one can escape from God. So a person rebels against God. What do they think? The babies. It's like a child rebelling against the parent. The parent disciplines the child. What does the child do? Natural reaction. I'm not talking to you anymore, Daddy. I don't like you, Daddy. You can't rebel against your parent. So similarly, how much more so we can't rebel against our parent in heaven. So therefore, What is the normal reaction? So let's go through the natural reactions when a person is faced with grief and death and mourning. First stage is shock. Person doesn't know what to do. It's a new thing, hit a person, unless obviously we're talking about long illness. But normally people who are faced with these situations are in a state of shock. They cannot believe that this is happening to them. It's like a bad dream. It's a really big shock. Secondly, this is followed by disbelief. The person doesn't believe this is happening. The shock is followed by disbelief. And thirdly, it's followed by anguish and grief. People get into a state of grief, mourning, very deep grief. And then that's followed by a state of fear. What is the fear? The fear is, how can I cope? How will I manage? How will we manage if it's a family? How will we manage if a breadwinner passes away? So how will we manage? It's a sense of fear. How am I going to manage without my father, without my mother? How am I going to manage? Fourthly, the question is always in the head. Why is God doing this to me? Why is God doing it to us? And fifthly, guilt. There's guilt. There's feelings of guilt. Maybe I could have been a better son. I could have been a better daughter. I could have been a better spouse. I could have been a better father. I could have been a better sibling. There's feelings of guilt. And then, hopefully, there'll be a slow adaptation, a slow acceptance of what happened. And without that acceptance of what happened, a person will never get better. There has to be a slow acceptance of what happened. And finally, this acceptance is followed by a lifestyle adaptation. A change of lifestyle to adapt to what has happened. So lifestyle changes. Sometimes a very drastic change of lifestyle, especially people who are very close to each other, people married very many years. It's a very radical change of lifestyle. Let's talk about that's the regular process of what a person goes through in terms of death and mourning. But let's talk about the Jewish process. That's the regular process. What about the Jewish process? And it's interesting. The Jewish process starts before burial. The Jewish process starts already after death. As soon as the death occurs, the Code of Jewish Law says a person must rip their clothes. As soon as a person hears bad news, we rip our clothes. Which was a revolution. Today, people don't want to rip their clothes. So today they want to have just a little black ribbon and tear the ribbon, but the clothes, Has v'shalom, we don't want to rip our clothes, it's too expensive, the shirt, or whatever. But it's interesting, one time the Bible tells us, in those days they would rip out their hair. They would rip their flesh. Until today, some societies in Iran, the Shiite Muslims, they do this. They cause bleeding. They're showing their suffering by causing bleeding to themselves. So Judaism was a revolution in terms of, in those days, in those societies, they would actually cause themselves damage when they heard bad news. And in British history, we know of kings who lost parts of their kingdom. They would actually go berserk. They would rip out their hair, they'd tear their clothes, they'd go crazy, they'd rip their flesh. So this is pretty recent, until recently. Judaism says, show some self-control. We have to do something to show that our heart is broken. That's interesting in Jewish law. A person's parents pass away, they have to rip their clothes over their heart to show that their heart is broken. The other relatives, the rip is done on the right side. So for parents, it's done over the left, over the heart. For other relatives, it's done on the right side. So the parents are always, it's interesting because there's a fifth commandment involved with parents. So that makes the mourning a deeper kind of mourning. We find this also applies to other kinds of mourning as well. Regular relatives, there's a 30-day mourning period. For parents, it's a year. So we find parents are the strongest mourning period. And that's the reason is to show the child that the child is really mourning for the people who brought them into the world. The biggest debt we owe. And it's something which we don't realize till it's too late, unfortunately. The biggest debt we owe in our lives is to our parents. They brought us into the world and they supported us. Hopefully they were good parents. Usually the Jewish parents are very good parents. I was talking to an Israeli pediatrician. This Monday we had a class, women's class, and we had an Israeli pediatrician. She says, she compares the parents over here, the parents in Israel. So the parents in Israel drive them crazy, the pediatricians. Why? You tell the parent brings in their child with the earache. So pediatrician looks inside the ear, it's fine. So over here you tell the parent, it's fine, I'll go home, it's okay. Nothing there. I didn't see anything. So in Israel, they'll bug. Parents go on. What does it look like? What does it look like? Why is it? Hey, they won't leave them alone. 5 minutes, they're interrogating the doctors. Those are the Jewish parents. We owe our parents everything we have. Everything we have, we owe our parents. And therefore the mourning for parents is much deeper mourning, and the rip is over the heart. Not only that, but in those days, people only had one set of clothes. So to rip one's clothes is a major expense. So halakha talks about stitching up the rip. So for other relatives, a person can stitch up the rip in a very nice way. They can do it in a way that the rip is not even noticed. For parents, it's forbidden to stitch it up in a way that it's not noticed anymore. That rip has got to be shown permanently. Today what we do is we just throw away the garment, but in those days they couldn't afford it. So you can imagine they had a garment with a rip. One rip here for the father, one rip here for the mother. That's a very sad state of affairs. But that rip was like a medal, showing their honor to their parents. So that rip would last. So that's the second stage, is ripping the clothes. Third stage is saying a blessing. The Talmud says an amazing idea. The Talmud says something which is probably the hardest halakha, probably the hardest law in the Talmud. It says, just like a person must bless over good news, a person must bless God over bad news. What does that mean? Person hears this news, they won the lottery. That's a different issue. Are you allowed to play the lottery? That's a different issue. That's a different class. Say a person wins the lottery. Mazel tov. What does he do? Makes a blessing. Or he buys a brand new car. He's very happy. What does he do? Thank God for giving me the life to reach this day. Thank you, God. The person's so happy. He says a blessing. That's the beautiful blessing. So he's saying with gusto, he won the lottery. The Talmud says, just like a person makes a blessing over good news, a person has to make a blessing over bad news. And the same way a person makes a blessing over good news, with the same gusto, with the same desire, with the same thanks, a person's got to make it over bad news. That's very hard to comprehend. We see this with Abraham. Abraham Avinu, our forefather Abraham. God says, go and sacrifice your son. What does he do? It says, the Torah says, Vayashkem Abraham Aboker. He gets up early in the morning. Why? The rabbis say he went with gusto. He went with zrizut. God says to do something, however much I don't like it, it's from God. I've got no choice. I'm going to do it because God says to do it. He's the boss. God is the boss. There's a beautiful book you can get in English. It's called All for the Boss. It's a very nice book. It's published by Feldheim. Excellent book. And everything this righteous person did, he did all for the boss. Whatever he does for his boss. Who's his boss? God is his boss. So a person who has that attitude that God is the boss, whatever the boss gives you good, you accept the good. So just like we accept the good, we have to also accept the bad. And usually what happens is people come to the rabbi when things are not going good, they come to the rabbi, they say, why? The best answer is, how come you didn't come to me when things were going well? How come you didn't ask why when? When everything's going well, we accept it. When everything's not going well, we start questioning. How come? So the Talmud says, just like we accept the good with a blessing, we have to accept the bad with a blessing. And the truth is, there's a deeper level, which is the level of Nachum Ish Gamzu. Nachum Ish Gamzu's favorite saying was, Gamzu L'tova. Whatever God does has good in it. There's no way God does anything which is bad. God is totally good. Whatever God does is totally good. We just can't see it. It's like watching a clip from a movie. We can see one clip of the movie, we don't see the whole movie. We don't know what's going on. God has a plan. For example, the person misses a train. Bad, missed the train. 10 minutes later, the train crashes. So, the person's got to know that there are bad things in life, but that bad thing might eventually lead to something good. Gamzu L'tova means that bad thing itself is good. There's no thing is bad. God created evil, that evil itself is good. Why is evil good? So that's a deeper question. That was Job's question, the question of Job. There's a book in the Torah which deals with a person called Job, Eov in Hebrew. And there's a discussion in the Gemara. Who was Job? So one opinion is he was an advisor of Pharaoh in the time of Pharaoh. And he lived in the time of Moses. Another opinion that says he lived way before that. And the third opinion says he never lived at all. This whole book is a parable of how to deal with suffering in life. How should a person deal with suffering? That's what the book of Job is. It's a philosophical book. It's a philosophical work. The question is, why do the righteous suffer and why do the wicked prosper? And the Talmud in Brachot asks that question. Someone says, why do the righteous suffer? The Talmud answers, Tzaddik veralo. A tzaddik and it's bad for him. The righteous person is going bad for him. Tzaddik ben Rasha. He's a righteous person, the son of an evil person. Rasha v'tovlo, an evil person, everything's going good. He's an evil person, the son of a righteous person. What's going on over here? Evil person, son of a righteous person. What's going on over here? So I saw a beautiful idea. The Khatam Sofer says a great idea. This puzzle in the Talmud. It says it's all perspectives in life. Everything is perspectives in life. If a person is really righteous, everything in life is enjoyable. Why? They enjoy everything in life. They take the rough with the smooth. Everything is enjoyable. Everything is part of God's plan. Everything is enjoyable. If a person is evil, what happens? He doesn't enjoy life. Why? Everything in life is all bitter. Everything's bitterness. They don't accept God's will. A person doesn't accept God's will, everything's bitter. So now, why did the righteous suffer? He's a righteous man, the son of an evil man. His father never taught him how to enjoy life. So he's suffering. Why is he suffering? Doesn't know how to enjoy life. Doesn't know how to accept God's decree. Because his father was an evil man. He didn't teach his son how to enjoy. And why do the wicked prosper? Because the wicked man, his father was a righteous man who taught the wicked son how to at least enjoy life, how to accept God's plan, how to accept the bad things in life. So anyway, there's a philosophical question of how to accept. But Judaism says, you know what, you have questions. But one thing you cannot do is not accept. There is a God. Accept. Say a blessing. Recognize that God is a God of justice. And we see this also. Abraham tells God. God says, I'm going to destroy Sodom. He said, how can you do such a thing? You're the master of the universe. You're a judge. You're a true judge. How can you do such a thing? How are you going to destroy the righteous with the evil? He argues with God. You see, you're allowed to argue with God. You're allowed to question. But eventually he's stuck. He has to accept God's decree. What does the Torah say over there? I just saw today a beautiful idea. It says, the Torah says, Abraham went back to his place. Abraham shav limkomo. God, he had an argument with God. Don't destroy Sodom. If you find 10 righteous people, don't destroy Sodom. This is okay. But then God goes and destroys Sodom because he can't find 10 righteous individuals. So it says over there, it ends off the conversation, Abraham shav limkomo. Abraham goes back to his place. What does that mean? He went back to his place. So the word to go back is the same word as teshuvah. Teshuvah is repentance, going back. Abraham goes back, which means when a person is unsuccessful with God, what do? What do they have to do? They have to do teshuvah. What does that mean? Abraham realized his merits were not enough to save Sodom. So Abraham went back to his place. He says, my merits are not enough to save the place. My merits were not enough to save the place. He's going to do teshuvah now to increase his merits. So he realized his merits are not enough. So that's number one. The person's got to accept the decree. How do we accept the decree? In a beautiful way. Imagine accepting the decree. Something bad happens, what happens? Blessed are you, God. The true judge. That's a tremendously high level of faith. Unfortunately, most people today, the rabbi says it with them, they don't know what they're saying. And it's very hard to do it. I mean, I had a hard time when my father passed away, saying this blessing and trying to figure out, you really mean it. Baruch atah Hashem, you say, blessed are you, God. Just like a person gives you a gift, you say, Shechianu. Person at the wedding says, Shechianu. And how are you going to say that over a time of mourning? How's a person going to say a blessing to God and really mean it? So that's really what Judaism is trying to teach us, is really emunah, faith. To accept the good, accept the bad, accept everything. God is in control. God is our Father. God only wants good for us. So if God wants good for us, we have to accept that even the bad is good. Gamzula tova, even the bad is good. The third thing we do is, at the funeral, we do what's called tziduk hadin. Tziduk hadin means making judgment righteous. God's judgment is not evil. God's judgment is righteous. That also takes a lot of emunah. So first person says a blessing, thanks God for everything. And then we come along and say, why? Because the questions are going on in our heads. Why is this going on? What do I do to deserve this? Why is God doing this to me? It's unfair. So in Jewish law, what we do is we say tziduk hadin. God is right. God's justice is righteous. That's very hard. This whole stage, this whole first stage, is a very hard stage to go through. But before even morning starts, there's a period of twilight, which I found the hardest. The period of twilight is, as soon as the relative passes away, there's a period called what's called onen, aninut. Onen is not allowed to do any commandments of the Torah, any positive commandments. He has to keep the negative commandments, but not allowed to do any positive commandments. He's not allowed to pray, he's not allowed to say grace after meals, not allowed to say a blessing on food, not allowed to wear talit, tefillin, no blessings. Why? He has a supreme mitzvah to do, overriding commandment. The overriding commandment is to bury his relative. And that takes precedence over everything else. I have a general rule in the Talmud, Kol ha'osek b'mitzvah patur min mitzvah. Whoever's busy doing one mitzvah is exempt from all the other mitzvah. So this person's busy doing one mitzvah of burial, therefore he is not obliged to do any other kinds of mitzvah. But the negative mitzvah still applies. He's not allowed to go and eat non-kosher food, not allowed to go and break Shabbat, but all the positive mitzvah doesn't have to pray, doesn't have to say blessings. It's very strange. It's a person in a twilight zone. Here I am. I mean, it's a very strange feeling. You're not allowed to do it. You can't say the Shema. Why? My relative is still unburied. How can I say the Shema? It's a kind of disregard for his honor. The body's lying over there, and I didn't bury him. Here I am praying to God. God doesn't want to hear my prayers right now. God says, hey, there's a more important mitzvah right now. Go bury the deceased. By the way, in Jewish law, it's very, very important the deceased get buried fast as soon as possible. The Bible tells us by a murderer, it says, Lo talin nivlato ala etz. Don't let his body hang on a tree. In those days, it was very common, till recently, that people would let the bodies of the murderers hang on trees as a warning to others. And the Romans did this all the time. The crucifixion was the most gory kind of death. The guy died a slow death on the cross, and his body was just left there. We find the dead of Beitar. We find there are 4 blessings in the Birkat Hamazon. From the Torah, there's only 3. The rabbis added a 4th one when the Romans allowed them to bury the dead of Beitar. Bar Kokhba's revolt. The last city which revolted was Beitar, which was Bar Kokhba's main hiding place, a stronghold. The Romans never allowed the Jews to bury their dead for 2 years. The dead of Beitar were just lying in the fields. And when they allowed them, they added a 4th blessing in the Birkat Hamazon. Hatov HaMeitiv. They added the 4th blessing as a thank you to God for allowing us to bury our dead. But Onen is not allowed to do any mitzvot, positive commandments, because there's an overriding commandment. There's an overriding commandment of burial. But it's a twilight zone. It's a very hard zone. You can't mourn. You can't say Kaddish. You can't do anything. The dead is not buried yet. So the dead has got to be buried. Then we said Kriya, a person rips a clothes, a person says a blessing, a person does Sedur Kadin, accepts God's decree. And then Shiva, 7 days of mourning. And it's interesting, people don't realize and appreciate how much we need those 7 days of mourning, how much a person needs to get adjusted, how much a person needs to unburden themselves. What are the laws? One of the laws we find of chesed, of kindness. Rambam discusses the laws of kindness. Interesting. The Rambam talks about the laws of kindness in the laws of mourning. Why? Because the highest level of kindness a person can do is with someone who passed away. Why? That's called chesed shel emet. It's called true kindness. Normally when a person does a kind act, they always have the back of the mind, maybe I'll get something back in return. If a person does a kind act to someone who passed away, there's no way he can pay you back. He's not coming back to pay you back. So there's no way. So that's called chesed shel emet. That's called true kindness. So Rambam puts the laws of visiting the mourners in the laws of kindness, and laws of kindness in the laws of visiting mourners. And he connects 3 different acts of kindness to mourners. And he tells us, if you have a choice of going to a wedding or comforting mourners, go to comfort mourners. Why is that? Because you go to a wedding, you get carried away. The person thinks life is one big party. We lose touch with reality. And the answer is, life is not one big party. Life is, we're just here temporarily. All of us. There's a beautiful story. It says, one of the rabbis went to visit people in a terminal ward. It was a cancer patient. And on the way out, he met one of his congregants who was a surgeon over there. He says, tell me, how can you be a doctor in this ward? How can you take this? You're surrounded with all these people, terminally ill people. So the doctor turned around, he says, Rabbi, he says, you don't understand, he says, all of us are terminal. We just don't want to admit the truth. The fact is, all of us are terminal, all of us are on a one-way street. Very morbid to look at it like that. But it's the reality of the situation. What we're trying to do is escape the reality of the situation. But that's the reality of the situation. Therefore, the rabbi said, if you have a choice of going to a house of mourning and going to a wedding, go to the house of mourning. This way a person is in touch with reality. That's reality. Reality is the house of mourning. Wedding is surreality. It's enjoyment and fun, but that's not. A person's out of touch with reality. So therefore the Rambam says, it's a tremendous mitzvah to comfort mourners. Why? It's a mitzvah to the living and to the dead. Going to a wedding is a mitzvah to the living. Going to comfort mourners is showing honor to the dead and to the living. So it's a double mitzvah, and therefore it's more priority. Going to house of mourning is more of a priority. To bury the dead is a tremendous mitzvah. To prepare the funeral, to carry the body. Today we don't even do that. We put it on a hearse, but in one time they would carry the body. If anyone saw the funeral last week of Rosh Hashach, they carried his body for miles to the cemetery. And that's the traditional Jewish way. It's a tremendous mitzvah. It's also a mitzvah to take part in the burial, to throw in some shovels of earth. It's a very big mitzvah. So again, today we're sanitized. We want to be sanitized. We want to be connected with death and dying. So everything's sanitized. At one time, people died at home. And the children saw, and the families saw. The families were around the bed. We're going to see in the story of Jacob, when Jacob passes away, he calls all his sons. They join around his bed. He calls them all and he blesses them before he goes. Very nice way to go. So the Shiva, the friends and relatives provide a support system. It's a tremendously important psychological device. The Shiva is a tremendously important device. Where is it first mentioned in the Torah? We're going to see the story of Joseph. Joseph proclaims a 7-day mourning period for his father Yaakov, for Jacob. So it's the concept of Shiva in the Torah. And that's very, very important. It gives a person a chance to unburden themselves. When a person goes to a house of mourning, it shouldn't turn into a party. It's unfortunate. Sometimes it turns into so many people go, and they're chatting to each other, and they ignore the mourner. The mourner's in the back, everyone else is chatting to each other. It turns into a party as opposed to what it should be. What should it be? It should be an opportunity for the mourner to unburden himself or herself. How do we make it an opportunity for the mourner to unburden himself or herself? The answer is, a person is not allowed to talk to the mourner until the mourner starts the conversation. We should not be the ones to direct the conversation. The mourner should be the one to direct the conversation. Sometimes the mourner doesn't want to talk. That's his prerogative. Leave the mourner alone. Don't let him talk. Just sit there. Just to show that I care. I'm here because I care. I care about you, and that's why I'm here. But to start a conversation, especially when it turns into a happy conversation, this and that and the other, if the mourner doesn't want to talk, don't talk. If the mourner wants to talk about something, don't change the subject. The conversation has to be directed by the mourner because he has a lot to get off his chest. The mourner has a lot of baggage to get off the chest, and the 7 days of mourning are the ideal opportunity, because he can't go to work, can't do anything, get off one's chest. So today what happens is people go to work the next day, and what happens? They have a psychologist 3 months later because they're still having trauma. Judaism says, you know what, 7 days, get it over now. Get the 7 days of mourning. Use those 7 days. Amazing. Use those 7 days to unburden oneself as much as possible. Get the comfort. Get the tears off. The first 3 days of the 7 are designated for crying. The rabbi said the first 3 days are the main days of crying. The last 4 days of mourning, a person should already try and get over the crying. Prepare themselves to go back to regular society. They go back to regular society, but it's still not regular. Why? They have 30 days of mourning. The next period is 30 days. So the 7 days, part of the 7 is the first 3 days are the worst. The last 4 days are the 7 days. Then there's 30 days of mourning where a person is not allowed to go to any parties, no music for 30 days, grow his hair, no haircuts for 30 days. Again, it's part of the system of adjustment. A person has to go through a system of adjustment. The Rambam says when a person takes a shower, a hot shower, they shouldn't go straight from hot to cold. They should adjust the temperature, water temperature, to put it down to lukewarm. In those days, they never had central heating. So if it was cold outside, the person would go straight out from the hot shower, right into the cold air. Rambam says you have to adjust. The body needs adjustment. You can't just go straight from hot to cold. It's very dangerous. So similarly, in traumas in life, a person has to go through a stage of adjustment. Judaism is amazing. Jewish system is an amazing system. It takes into account all these different ideas of adjustment. We need an adjustment period. 3 days of crying, 4 days of mourning, 30 days of mourning, and then for parents, a year of mourning. No parties, no music for a whole year. Okay, so that's interesting ideas in terms of the mourning period. What's also interesting is the first record of mourning we have in the Bible is in this week's Torah portion we're going to read. The Torah portion discusses the death of the wife of Abraham. Abraham Avinu's wife, Sarah, dies. And he conducts the mourning period. What does it say? So number one, he comes to eulogize Sarah. Find the idea, the concept of a eulogy. There's a concept in Jewish law of eulogizing someone. In honor of the dead, there's a mitzvah to eulogize, to say good things about the person. But a person's got to be very careful not to tell lies. A person has to be very careful, it's got to be factual, because God knows the truth. God knows when a person, So it's got to be all truthful. So there's a nice anecdote. It says a rabbi, one of his congregants passed away, but the rabbi never saw him in the synagogue. Hardly knew him. So he says, what he's going to say about this person? Doesn't know. He says, so-and-so never spoke in the synagogue. Why? He never came to synagogue. Well, he said something good about him, so he never talked during services. Never came to services. So at least something good. A person's got to find something good to say about someone. You can always find something good to say about someone. It's interesting, there is no mention of mourning before this period. It seems the first person to consider this kind of situation was Abraham, our forefather. We don't find this by Noah, we don't find this by Adam, we don't find this by anyone else. The first time it's mentioned in the Bible it's recorded is Abraham goes to eulogize Sarah and to mourn for her. So obviously his wife. His wife passes away. He eulogizes her, she was a great woman. And he mourns for her. Okay, so that's very important. What else does he do? He buys a cemetery. And this cemetery today is a big bone of contention between his various children. The cemetery was in Hebron, the cave of Machpelah. If you go to Hebron today, you'll find a beautiful building built by Herod the king, with the same stones, same design of stones as are on the Kotel, as on the Wailing Wall. Because the same Herod who beautified the temple was the same Herod who built the building around this cave. The cave of Machpelah is no cave, you can't see the cave. You see this massive structure on the cave, and you can't go down. You're not allowed to go down. There's a structure, you would go into there and pray, and there's prayer halls for Jews, and there's prayer halls for Arabs. Everyone's praying over there. And that's Hebron, which is a place where Abraham bought, it says explicitly, with his own money. That became a place of great contention. Who owns this place? So Abraham goes and buys a cemetery. It's interesting, when Jews move into a town, what's the order of priorities? What do they have to do? The first thing they have to do is buy a cemetery. The second thing they have to do is build a mikveh. The third thing they have to do is build a school. The fourth thing, only then comes a synagogue. Synagogue is the least of the priorities. Why? Because in Jewish law you can pray anyway. One does not need a synagogue to pray. You can have a prayer service in the house, you need a minyan. So you get a minyan anyway, you don't have to make it into a synagogue. So synagogue is the least of the priorities. The highest priority is a cemetery. Then there's a mikveh, because we have to keep our ritual purity alive. Number 3 is a school. We have to keep education. We have to educate the children. Number 4 is the synagogue. Only then do we have to worry about synagogue. And the Rambam has a whole list of 10 things. A person is not allowed to live into a town. A person is not allowed to live in a town which doesn't have these 10 things. One of the things is a doctor. So health is also very important. So there's many different things, various things a person's got to look for in a city. But there's an order of priorities in terms of prioritizing Jews move into a town. It's interesting, when Jews moved into New York, the first thing they did as an organized community is they bought a cemetery. When the Sephardic Jews moved into New York, under Stuyvesant, the first thing they did was buy a cemetery. That's halakha. Halakha is, you can pray anywhere, but you need to bury your dead in a certain location. A Jewish cemetery. It's very, very important. So Abraham comes to eulogize Sarah, to mourn for her, and to buy a plot for her. Importance of buying a plot. And the location of the grave is very, very critical. There are 2 ideal locations of the grave. In Jewish law, number 1 is close to other relatives, and the other, number 2, is in Israel. And Israel takes priority even over being buried with relatives. It's better to be buried in Israel, not near relatives, than be buried outside Israel near relatives. But either case, a person gets buried somewhere else, they can be moved in Jewish law, either to be buried next to relatives or to be taken to Israel. So the dead can be buried, and they shouldn't be buried. If they can be buried straight away near relatives or in Israel, they shouldn't be buried somewhere else. But if they happen to be buried somewhere else, they can be moved afterwards, they can be reinterred next to relatives or in Israel. Where do we see this? Jacob tells Joseph, swear to me you're not going to be burying me in Egypt. Don't bury me in Egypt. Please don't bury me in Egypt. Bury me only in the Holy Land. The Talmud has a whole discussion about this, and it condemns people who live outside Israel and then just want to be buried in Israel. Ideally, a person should live there and die there, live there. But a person can't live there. The next best thing is at least being buried there. So that's the next best thing. But we say in the Birkat Hamazon, we say an interesting line. We say, Harachaman hu yolechenu komemiut la'artzenu. Please, God, take us to Israel standing up. What does that mean, take us to Israel standing up? We want to walk there. We don't want to go there in a box. We want to walk there. We want to be able to go there walking. So that's the best blessing. The best blessing is we should go there walking. We should live there and have the merit to live there, not just the merit to be buried over there. So that's Abraham. What do we learn from Abraham? 3 things. Number 1 is eulogies. Number 2, mourning. And number 3 is the burial, actual burial. But it's interesting. In the Torah, there's certain letters which are written big and certain letters which are written small. For example, the Shema Yisrael, the first line of the Shema. 2 letters of the first line are written very big. Shema, Shin Mem Ayin. The Ayin of Shema is written very big in the Torah. The last word is Echad, which means one. The Dalet of Echad is also written very big. And the Torah is written very big. Why? The answer is because Ayin and Dalet make up the word Eid. These are witnesses. When a person says the Shema, they're giving witness that God is one. So actually the words itself, there's testimony in the words themselves. It's like, who's going to give witness? The words themselves are going to give witness. But over here, in this verse, which talks about Abraham Avinu crying, the kaf of the word crying, lifkota, is small. So the commentaries ask, why is this letter small in the Torah? He's crying, but the letter is small. So the commentaries say, beautiful idea. Who is the person meant to cry for, and who is the person not meant to cry for? And this is a beautiful idea. The Talmud says, people are foolish. Why are people foolish? It says, when people are born, when a child is born, everyone's celebrating. When a person dies, we're all mourning. The Talmud says it should be the other way around. Why? The Talmud says it's compared to a boat. A boat is leaving on its maiden voyage. Let's take the case of the Titanic, right? When do you make the party? When it leaves or when it comes back? So in those days especially, boats hardly came back. They left in the seas, the chance of it coming back. The Talmud says sailors were the most pious people. Why were sailors the most pious people? Who's praying the most? The sailors on the seas. Why in those days the boats never came back. There were storms, one storm, and those boats were so rickety, they just get destroyed. So sailors were very, very pious. We see this in the story of Jonah. The sailors on the boat, they were all praying to their gods. Whatever God it was, they were all praying. The whole boat was praying, except for Jonah's not praying. Why aren't you praying? Get up. Who's your God? What's wrong? Why aren't you praying? Get up and pray. Everyone's meant to be praying. So, when does the person celebrate? When the boat comes back. Not when the boat leaves. So the Talmud says the same thing. When a baby is born, we don't know what that baby's going to do. We don't know what that baby's going to grow up into. Righteous, not righteous, good, bad, evil. Who knows what the baby's going to do? He's going to be murderer, not murderer. What's the baby going to do? We should be worried when a baby's born. Look at this potential. Here's a potential. What are we going to do with this potential? It's a potential for life, for good or for bad. It's right in front of us, the potential. When a person passes away and they're righteous, it's a cause for celebration. The person succeeded in life. They passed the test of life. So Thomas says, ideally, when a person is born, we should be worried. It's a very hard thing to do. It's an amazing idea over here. The Talmud puts everything backwards. Everything is flipped on its head. Different perspective of life. When a child is born, it's, when I got married, my wife was very worried. I asked her, why are you very worried? She said, the responsibilities of being a parent worry me. That's a very mature thing for a young girl to say. So it's the responsibilities, men don't really think about responsibilities. If they do, they don't get married. So it's better sometimes not to think about the responsibilities. That's why it's better to get married young sometimes, because then people don't think so much. So when a person gets older, it's much harder to get married. They start thinking about this, about that, about the other, then they stay single. It's one of the big problems we're having today. So responsibilities, the child is born, it's major responsibilities. King David in Shir Malot compares children, he says a person who has many children is like a gibor, chetzim biyad gibor. It's like arrows in the hands of a mighty warrior. Children are compared to arrows. Why are children compared to arrows? Because once you shoot the arrow, it's out of your hands. Once you raise that child, the child grows up, the child's gone. Your impact on the child is ended. The person's impact on the child Today we can only impact on children till the age of 13, 12, 13. Once they're over 13, they know more than we do already. So once that child's in our hands, it's a tremendous responsibility on the parents to raise that child properly. After that, it's gone already. It's too late. So we have to compare life as a voyage. The boat sets sail. That's a child who's born. Goes through the voyage of life. Is it going to reach its destination? We don't know. Only when the person reaches maturity and has led a righteous life, like Sarah did, Abraham says, fine, my wife Sarah was a righteous woman. I'm not going to cry so much. She achieved her purpose in life. She achieved her mission in life. There's not much to cry about. So crying should be safe for a person who didn't reach their purpose in life. A person passed away young. Those are real tragic situations. A person passed away, thank God, after many years. They had a good life. They led a righteous life. That kind of person we don't have to cry. Really, we're crying for ourselves. We're not crying for them. Them, thank God, they're in a good place. We believe that there's a hereafter, which we're going to talk about. There is Olam Haba. It's called Olam Haba. The world to come. And the world to come, the Rambam says, is not because it's coming, because it's here already. But for us, it's coming. We're here, we're in the here and now. But it's right here, right now, for people who passed away. People who passed away, they're already in the world to come. The world to come is right now. It's a different dimension, that's all. The world to come is right here. For different people, for people who passed away. So we find that there is a concept in Jewish law of a hereafter. Where do we see this? When a person passes away, what do we do? There's a prayer. What's the prayer to say? What prayer do we say on a dead person? Kaddish. Say Kaddish. What is Kaddish? What does Kaddish mean? It comes from the word Kiddush. On Shabbat we bring Kiddush.
Blessing?
Sanctification. Kiddush means sanctification. We sanctify the wine, and sanctify the Shabbat over a cup of wine. That's Kiddush. We say Kaddish, which means we're sanctifying God's name. It's interesting, the whole Kaddish does not mention death and dying. It's a very strange prayer.
It wasn't for death and dying.
Right.
The Kaddish.
Nothing to do with death and dying.
No.
So why do we say it?
Sanctification in the synagogue,
Right.
God's name.
Sanctifying God's name. So why do we say it when a person dies? So the answer is, we're trying to give merit to the soul. All the things we do, all the prayers we say after death, are prayers in order to elevate the soul of the deceased. So we believe in a hereafter, we believe that the soul lives on, and we believe that things that we do as relatives of the deceased, we can transfer merit to that soul. So basically, what is one of the highest things we can do in this world is sanctifying God's name. A Jew can sanctify God's name. That's one of the things we can do. Sanctifying God's name is tremendous merit. So a person sanctifies God's name, that merit will go now to the deceased. So that's the whole idea of Kaddish, is sanctifying God's name, and the merit of that will go to the deceased. Another thing which is important to know is when the mourners come back from the cemetery, first time, there's a mitzvah to eat. It's called Sudat Havra'ah. And the main mitzvah is that the relatives and the friends of the mourner bring the food. The mourner does not eat his own food. Someone else has to provide it. Usually today what we have is eggs, hard-boiled eggs, and a bagel, a piece of bread. Where does that custom come from? We find that Jacob was cooking lentils. So the Talmud asks, why was Jacob cooking lentils? So the Talmud says, because Abraham passed away that day. His grandpa Abraham was passed away that day, and he was eating a food which is round, which is the whole symbol of the egg. The egg is round, which symbolizes the cycle of life. King Solomon says, Dor holech v'dor ba. One generation goes, and one generation comes. It's the cycle of life. So there's death, and there's birth, and there's death, and there's birth, the cycle of life. All of us were part of that cycle of life. And it just keeps on going. The cycle of life just will keep on going. With or without us, the earth keeps on going. So then, why do we eat when we come back to the cemetery? And the answer is, we're affirming that we want to live. We're affirming that we accept God's decree. It's a mitzvah, can you imagine? A person just suffered a loss. What is the natural reaction? I'm not going to eat for a couple of days. I don't feel like eating. You just suffered a loss. Talmud says, no, eat. Reaffirm your faith in God. Person comes back, eat. You have to reaffirm our faith in God. Not only that, but the blessings the person says is a merit for the person who passed away. The blessings on food. Food plays an important role in the Shiva house. All the blessings just said in the Shiva house will be a merit for the person who passed away. And this particular Sephardic custom, 30 days, make a big party, 11 months, another party, 12 months, another party. What's the party? The party is the merit of the food. Eating the food and saying the blessings of the food goes to the merit of the deceased. So it's a totally different perspective in terms of life and death. Judaism is a totally different perspective. Birth, person's got to be worried. Death, certain situations, Abraham wasn't worried about Sarah's death. He didn't cry that much. After all, she had a righteous life. That's the main thing. And therefore he didn't cry so much. So that's Abraham. Next case we find in the Bible is the case of Joseph. Yosef, the brother sold Joseph. At least it doesn't actually say that. But if you want to look it up, you should really look it up. It's in chapter 37 of Genesis. And what happens? They take his coat, they slaughter a goat, dip his coat in blood, and then they tell the father, "We found this. Daddy, whose coat is this? Is it your son's coat?" He recognized it and he said, "My son's coat. A beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to bits." Then he rent his garments, he did kriya, rent his garments. He placed sackcloth on his loins, and he mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to comfort himself. And he said, "I will go down to my grave mourning for my son." Okay, that is not a very traditional point of view of mourning. Jews don't go down to their graves mourning. We accept God's decision, and we continue with life. So Rashi over here says an interesting idea. And this is a case in people whose bodies are missing. It's very hard to accept something where there's no proof. There's always a hope that you can't close a chapter on something which is not there to be closed. And this is something with the Twin Towers. So many people are mourning, but there's nothing to mourn over. I just heard of a case where they had a symbolic ceremony and then they found the body. There are hundreds of thousands of body parts they found. They're trying to check the DNA. So they don't know who belongs to what and what belongs to who. It's a very hard situation. That's the hardest situation. Yeah.
And that was the thing behind the giving of the urns with the
Yeah. Okay, but it doesn't really help. It's just symbolic. But the truth is, so to close a chapter, you have to have something there. Yaakov Avinu, Jacob never was able to close that chapter. There was a question mark. Same is true in Israel. The missing in action. Soldiers missing in action. You have these 3 soldiers. The Hezbollah captured them. Now today they're saying they're dead. But the people are still parents. It's a terrible way to go. There's nothing. You want closure. So Jacob. So we see over here the importance of closure. The importance of closure. For a person to carry on with their lives, to set their lives in order, they've got to be able to close. So that's why it's important to bury the person as soon as possible, or arrange closure as soon as possible. And then there's a difference in the customs of when to set the tombstone. Sephardim, we set tombstones after 30 days. Ashkenazim wait a year for a tombstone. What is the symbolism behind that? And again, the symbolism is, how soon should you forget the deceased? On the one hand, I want closure. I want to be able to carry on with my life. On the other hand, carrying on with one's life too soon is not giving enough honor to the deceased. So that's the big debate, is when do you set the tombstones? Sephardim say 30 days is enough. That's the standard mourning. Mourning is 30 days. Therefore, you can already put the tombstone up after 30 days. Is not disrespect. Ashkenazim say, no, it's disrespectful.
In Israel, they sometimes do that for the ship.
Yeah. So that's the Sephardi custom. It's more Sephardi custom, which is straight away. It's not disrespectful. We want closure, and it's not disrespectful. But there's different customs based on this concept. So you can imagine Jacob could not find closure. And the rabbis say if a relative is still alive, there's a feeling that a person has that they cannot close. They can't turn the page. There's a doubt in a person's mind. It's very hard to get closure. So the truth is, this was a false kind of mourning. But what do we see? Number one is he ripped his clothes, which is what we do. We do kriya. And number 2, he started mourning for him, which is what we do as well. Only difference is he mourned for many days. So he didn't get closure. So it's very, very important to get the closure. The next case is Jacob passes away. What happens? Joseph, who's the viceroy of Egypt, makes a massive funeral. And they all go from Egypt, massive retinue, they go all the way to Israel. And they bury him in Hebron. And they carry him to the land of Hebron, they bury him in the cave of Machpelah, and they go back to Egypt. And it says Joseph, he has a very great imposing eulogy for his father and a 7-day mourning period. It's the root of the 7-day mourning period is from here, the story. The idea of a Shiva is the mourning period. And when it says that Jacob died, it's one of the sources for the world to come. It says Yaakov dies and he gathers his feet on the bed and he gets gathered to his fathers. The word for dying is V'yasef el amav, he's gathered to his people. So whenever it says gathered to his people, what do you mean gathered to the people? It wasn't buried yet. What do you mean gathered to his people? His soul goes to his people. His soul goes back to his family. So people passed away and they come to greet the soul of the deceased. So that's important idea. The idea of the hereafter is a very, very comforting idea in Judaism. Let me tell you a little story, a beautiful story. If you can imagine twins in the mother's stomach, twins inside the womb, and if you can imagine the ecology of the womb, it's wet, it's dark, it's a lot of banging, the heart is pounding, and there's an imaginary conversation between the twins. One twin tells the other, he says, this is not the only world there is. There's another world after this. We're going to come out from this world. We're going to breathe through our noses. We're going to eat through our mouths. We're going to be able to see with our eyes. The other twin says, you're an idiot. You're a joker. This is the world. That's all there is. That's all there is. What happens? The woman goes into labor. One twin is panicking. We're going to die. Everything's going to be over. And the twin says, no, there's another world. Don't worry. We're going to come out into another world. So lo and behold, what happens is she gives birth and they come out into the world. One comes out into the world smiling. The other one comes out of the world crying and screaming. So one is coming out into the world panicking. The other one comes into the world smiling. And if you can take the analogy a bit further, Judaism says there's a world to come. So there's two ways of approaching it. One person says, I don't believe in it. The other person says, I believe in it. The one who believes in it will prepare himself and get ready for the world to come and therefore won't panic. One who doesn't believe in it will panic and go through all these denials. So therefore it's good to be prepared. So Yaakov was prepared. He blesses all his children and he's prepared. He says the Shema and that's it. Goodbye. That's the way a Jew should go. A Jew should go. The last word a Jew should say should die with Echad. God is one. Unity of God. That's the best way for a Jew to go and go prepared for his voyage. So what the difference between Judaism and the Pharaohs. The Pharaohs thought you could take everything physical with you. They made these massive pyramids. They took all their servants, they took their gold and their silver, and they thought you could take everything with them. And what happened is, their bodies ended up in all the museums around the world. Their gold and silver scattered all over with the grave robbers and all this and that, and eventually they couldn't take anything with them. Judaism says the only thing we can take with us is our good name and our good deeds. The value of our good deeds we can take with us, and the value of our good name we can take with us. Those are the good things which we can take with us. Yes?
What is the Jewish concept of the world to come? What is it?
What is the Jewish concept of the world to come? Very, very good question. The answer is, it's a spiritual world. There's nothing physical. There's no physical bodies. So it's not like the Muslim concept where the guys, they want to blow people up and then they get 70 virgins or whatever it is. We don't have any concept of that. Right, they get beautiful houses and this and that. The Rambam says not to believe in these foolish things. The spiritual is a totally spiritual world. There's no eating, there's no drinking, there's no body as we know it. So we'll be seeing without eyes. We'll be feeling without the sense of touch. It's like if you can imagine a dream. What happens in a dream? You see in a dream. You touch in a dream. You feel in a dream. You eat in a dream. It's all going on in the mind. It's the highest level. The neshama is in the brain. And the soul is in the brain. So a person can visualize things without even actually having eyes. We can see without eyes. We can hear without ears. Or we can eat without mouths. So it's a totally spiritual world. It's a world in which it says the righteous will have pleasure from the image of God. They'll be so close to God, that's the pleasure they'll get. So just being close to God, I don't know about you, but when I was young, one of the pleasures I had was sitting next to my father in the synagogue. Just being in the warmth of my father's warmth. I don't know if you remember that stage when you're early 6, 7, 8 years old, and you sit next to your parent and the warmth and the security you feel, that's the feeling of joy in the world to come. The righteous have the feeling of joy of being next to God, being next to their parent. So, but it's a totally spiritual concept. And our mission over here is to prepare ourselves for that. How do we prepare ourselves for that? We prepare ourselves for that by sensitizing our soul over here. If we can sensitize ourselves over here. Let me give you. Someone was telling me today. Amazing. Had an amazing conversation with someone. I won't tell you who it was, but I'll tell you the conversation. This person just went to Israel for the first time. And they went to all the holy places. They said, I didn't feel a single spark of spirituality. Went to all the holy places. I went to Jerusalem, I went to the Kotel, I went here, I went there, and they're telling me, you didn't feel anything? No, I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel anything. So we have to sensitize ourselves to spirituality. Why didn't a person feel anything? We find there's a beautiful story that the Torah tells us. I just want to finish off with this story. It says there was a young boy called Samuel, Shmuel, and his mother dedicated him to the temple. And she gave him over to Eli. She was praying for a child for many years. She has a child. She said, God gave me a child, I'm going to give him back to God. She gives him over to the high priest. You raise him as a holy child. So he was 5, 6 years old. He goes and stays with the high priest. He does all the jobs for the high priest. He looks after the high priest. One day, this boy is sleeping. He hears a voice. Shmuel! Samuel! He runs to his master, Eli. He says, Eli, you call me? He said, no, I didn't call you. You must be dreaming. Go back to bed. Goes back to sleep. Eli! Shmuel! Runs to his master. Eli, you call me? He says, no, I didn't call you. Go back to bed. Eli! Shmuel! Sorry, I keep getting mixed up. Shmuel! Here's the voice. Go back. Runs to Eli. Says, if you hear that voice again, that is God calling you. If you hear that voice again, say, yes, God, I'm your servant. I'm listening to you. That was his first prophecy. The person has a prophecy, doesn't even know what he's hearing. He's seeing voices, hearing voices. It's God talking. But you know what? We don't even know that God's talking. The person sees things. Maybe God's trying to get a message across to the person. We're blind. Maybe a person's hearing things, God talking. We're deaf. So our mission in this world is to sensitize ourselves now, so that when God talks, we'll be able to know that it's God talking. A person can go to Israel and see all the things, not feel anything. Why? We don't know that God's talking to us. We're not sensitized to the fact that God's talking. So yeah, that's our mission in this world is.
You go into Yerushalayim and you go walk back into history and everything. That didn't.
She didn't know history. That was the whole problem. The whole problem was she didn't know her own history. So
That's
to
what she was
relive,
sensitized.
right? That's right. So to relive one's the past, one has to know the past. A person doesn't have any attachment to a place unless you know the history, what happened in that place. But that's what we have to do in this world. That's our mission in this world, is to sensitize ourselves to the voice of God.
What is a book that you would recommend that would give the history without reading the Bible itself?
Jews, God, and History.
Pardon?
Jews, God, and History by Max Diamond. Good evening. Good evening. Today's topic is coping with death and mourning. And it's interesting because we put this in the series. It's the last in the series of building relationships. So it's an interesting place to put it. Building relationships, and we're talking about coping with death and mourning. And the answer is, why are we doing this? And the answer is because through death and mourning, hopefully, a person will build new relationships. It's the end of one era and the beginning of a new era. We started off the series with building a relationship with God, with Hashem.